is a little different than has been in years past. For those of you who have been here for prior years, we thought we'd kind of take you through a walkthrough on what a day in the life of a Sunrise student looks like. When we talk education, there's always the vision in your head of a student sitting in a classroom with teachers. It is that, and that is a very important piece, obviously, of what we do in education. But there's a lot more that goes into that in terms of transportation and facilities and things like that as well. So we'll walk through that. Obviously, the piece that everybody's here to see, the draft budget. We'll go through a summary, and then we'll certainly take some questions after that. In terms of introductions, I'll start at this end. Our trustee from, I believe, Jarrett, your Ward 6, Jarrett Pachkowski. Stacy Bonato, who's the executive assistant to the board and to myself as the secretary-treasurer. Trustee Don Nickel from Ward 1. Thank you, Don. Trustee Art Berry from Ward 5. Trustee Paul Magnon from Ward 7. Our fearless leader in terms of management staff, Kathy Timko, our superintendent. Our trustees from Ward 4, Karen Inslee and Diane Duma. And Trustee Robin Harris from Ward 2 in the division. Related to our division. Our maintenance department now looking at what they call frame function 800, which they call operations and maintenance. Our budget this year, our proposed budget is looking to be $6.899 million in comparison to $6.6 last year. We're proposing an increase of about $244,000. The majority of that related to small capital projects, aesthetics in schools, painting, and minor repairs. We also have some ground repairs and improvements that we're looking at doing as well across the division. When I sat down to start working on this budget a month and a half ago, I met with our maintenance manager, and he provided me a list of about $1 million worth of priorities he has across the division. And in our first draft proposed budget, we only had about $400,000. So it's still going to be tight to do everything he wants to do. Our intention is to have him present to the board on what his priorities are and hopefully capture as many of those as we possibly can. We do well in comparison to other divisions. We're looking at per student costs of $1,500, similar to last year, and across the province, the cost per student is about $1,570. On a square foot basis, we also do quite well against other divisions in the province. We spend about $7.10 per square foot on maintenance and cleaning against $7.75 across the province. Then obviously we get into the school day. Our division employs about 375 teachers. We make sure to maintain as much as we can optimal student-to-teacher ratios to support student learning and student achievement. We also have costs for curriculum materials and supplies. We want to make sure our schools are well equipped, and that means furniture and things like technology as well, which we'll talk about in a second. Technology is becoming more and more a key component of the education system. A lot of our teachers use technology well to teach our students. We have smart board technology in many of our classrooms, which is sort of the interactive whiteboard type thing that you'll see behind our chair and vice chair. And it's become very useful in schools. Unfortunately, it's not inexpensive. So we rotate all our computer hardware replacements on a 5-year schedule. That includes laptops and computers in schools. We don't necessarily have a plan for rotating things like projectors and smart boards and things like that. So it can be a very costly investment. Here you'll see what they call regular instruction in frame, which is where the bulk of our costs reside. Function 100 in frame. Last year our budget was $34.7 million. This year we're looking at $35.6. It's a fairly dramatic increase of 2.63%, which I'll explain in a second. Our per student costs are increasing slightly from $7,600 to $7,800. We do spend a little bit higher than the provincial average of $7,500, and I think this is where our focus is making sure that the budget we prepare and the funds we have and the resources we have are expended on classrooms and not for other things. We're looking at an increase of $900,000, largely due to an increase of teachers. Our enrollment increased last year about 60 students. We did not adjust our staffing levels. Our enrollment is projected this year to increase another 80 students. So over the 2 years, looking at an increase of 140 students. So we're looking for an increase of 3 teachers. In addition to that, based on some research we're doing, we use an average cost for our 375 teachers. We believe it's a little low. Our teacher salaries are based on a grid. Cole would know this very well, but our agreements with the union are posted on our website, so you can take a look at that. It depends on what class the teacher is in, which relates to their education. It depends how many years teaching a teacher has. Their pay varies. So we've been taking a hard look at the composition of our current complement of teachers to figure out what class they're in and what that cost is, and we believe over the last couple of years we've been budgeting a little bit low in terms of average teacher salary. So that relates to a good chunk of the increase in budget this year as well. If any of you have looked at last year's audited financial statements, you'll see we did end up running a deficit against the budget, and I believe our use of a teacher's salary that was not quite sufficient enough to cover our actual costs was a big reason why we ran a deficit against budget last year. We get into some student support services. Obviously, here's our vision statement. Every student will have the opportunity to experience the joy of learning in the Sunrise School Division in order to be better prepared for the future with the knowledge, skills, and values to achieve their own personal life goals. It can mean different things for different students, of course. All of our students across the division have contact with our student support services personnel. There's guidance counselors, resource teachers, psychologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, social workers, mental health workers, and educational assistants. And they help our classroom teachers to provide the best opportunity for every student. So When you start talking about student support services, again, referring to FRAME, this is Function 200 for those of you that follow along with things like that. Last year we spent $13 million. This year we're looking at approximately that same number. Our per student costs are about $2,800 per student. We're looking at the percentage of budget on average across the province. We spend about 19.6% of our budget on student services against the provincial average of about 18.7%. By the way, if anybody's interested, all these FRAME reports are available on Manitoba Education's website for comparison's sake. Administration, look at all the beautiful people. So to support and direct our frontline staff, we lead work in human resources, finance, information technology, curriculum implementation, student services, all those sorts of things. Our administrative costs over the last several years have been subject to a cap as directed by the province, and that cap has been decreasing. So, you know, we have been forced to make sure we're lean and as efficient as possible when it comes to overhead costs related to the operation of schools. Included in our administrative costs are things like senior administration, again, human resources, finance, technology, and the board of directors as well. So again, we're trying to hold the line in administrative costs. It's you know, we look for opportunity to add value to education, and we want to use our resources on the front line in classrooms. So we're trying to hold as best we can to hold our administrative costs static. We've done a pretty good job looking at less than a 1% increase this year. Another $2 million in funding, but your obligation is to reduce your municipal education taxes by $2 million. So we've done that for the last several years. Again, this is being phased out by the province, so every year it's being reduced, which means that every year that's reduced. If we hold everything else constant in terms of our expenditures and property values, our mill rate would increase. The burden is higher on the municipal taxes or the taxpayer because of the reduction. So we're facing this decrease in TIG every year, and at the same time, the mandate from the province has been that as school divisions, we do not increase our municipal education taxes by any more than 2%. So we've been towing that line on an annual basis. However, what has helped us is the property values across our division have increased from about $2.67 billion to $2.811, a difference of about $133 million, or about almost 5%. So this is allowing us to keep the mill rate down, even given some of the increase in expenditures that we're proposing. The way it's looking right now, if we limit our education tax increase to the 2% mandated, we will be dropping the mill rate to at least 13.725. That's the highest we can go if we increase the municipal taxes by the full 2%. So our mill rate is dropping regardless. So here we are, and we'll get into more detail. This is sort of our budget overview. We are projecting, you can see on the top line, total expenses this year of $68.683 million, up from 67.1, an increase of 1.53, and we'll go through the detail on what's changed dramatically. Our provincial funding, as I mentioned, is up $748,000. So we are proposing an increase in the municipal taxes of $781,100. That's sort of the bottom line. You'll see the municipal levy at the bottom of that table. Last year was $39.1 million. This year, about $39.8. The good news is, based on the property values in our division, this means a reduction in the mill rate from 13.844 to 13.725. Here's a summary of all the programs I just went through. The dramatic increases, again, are mainly in regular instruction, something that we support students in our classrooms. We also have an increase in, we can look at this in more detail. Key increases, our enrollment increase has led to us to request 3 new teachers at a cost of about $270,000. Review of our contractual salary costs as per our bargaining agreement, and the reality of our complement of teachers right now is leading us to believe that we should be increasing our costs in average salary for teachers, leading to about $270,000 increase. We're looking to increase, as I mentioned, funding to maintenance to take on some projects on grounds and in schools. We are looking at an increase across the board in salaries. For those of you who are not aware of Bill 28, Bill 28 was a provincial directive that came in 2018 that mandated that civil servants did not receive an increase in pay for 2 years. In the 3rd year, could receive an increase of pay up to a maximum of 0.75%, and then in year 4, an increase of 1%. We have lived now through years 1 and 2 of a 0% increase for all of our staff, and are now moving into year 3. So we're budgeting for an increase of 0.75 in salaries across the division. We haven't bargained with most of our bargaining units yet, but we believe that's likely to be about where we may land. We're also looking for an injection of capital for our technology, about $355,000. This is proposed. I think the board still has some arm wrestling to do around how we're going to direct these dollars. And then we have some other minor changes up and down that total about $10,000. And that makes up our proposed changes of $1.53 million. In terms of our special requirement, again, our assessment across the division, property values are up 5%. Our total special requirement, which is our municipal education tax, we'll be asking for the municipalities to collect from ratepayers on our behalf, is increased to $39.8 million, which is an increase of about $782,000, or about 2%. This will result in a reduced mill rate of about 0.86, not quite 1% in taxes. just a graph, how things have changed over the years. Trustee Nickel had his property tax bill from quite a while ago, let's say. Tonight he was showing us, and property values were not quite the same back then, but the mill rate was substantially higher. I think it was 68 or something, Don, is that? Yeah. So, you know, things change. Property values increases and the mill rate needs to correspondingly decrease. So you'll see how we've done that over the course of the last 10 or 11 years. What does this mean to the average taxpayer? We always include this little graph. On an average home of, say, $300,000, you're looking at about a $16 decrease in your education taxes this year as a result of this budget. We slid this in a little bit. This is something that's been in the news quite a bit lately, so we thought we should probably address it somehow. So on January 30th, we received a letter from the Minister of Education, Mr. Calvin Goertzen, that again reiterated that we were to hold the line and maintain a freeze on management salaries. They also started requesting that divisions come up with a plan to cut management by 15%. They weren't real clear in defining management. So we're working with the province to seek some clarity on exactly what they mean by that. Traditionally, as you see there, and I discussed a little bit, we have been in compliant with Bill 28. We've frozen salaries for 2 years. We're going into year 3, so we are projecting a 0.75% increase. The one thing that the province has been clear on is that any savings from this 15% cut in management will not be taken back by the province. It will be left with the division to redirect into frontline costs. So while this may have an impact on how we allocate things in our budget, it is not likely to have an impact on the overall bottom line of the budget. So to summarize everything I've just talked about for the last 20 minutes or so, we are proposing a budget with an increase of $1.53 million in expenses, about 2.23% as compared to last year. We constantly and continue to work on controlling our operating and overhead spending. These are some of the projects that we're working on. Telephone and internet costs continue to increase, so we're in the midst of a project to look at that. We've recently renegotiated our interest rates on both long and short-term debt. We have a line of credit, and we have some debt on a capital project. We're starting to look at our electrical costs, and recently met with some folks who would be interested in doing LED lighting, and not only LED lighting, but also control systems in our school, which mean there's sensors. You walk into a classroom, the lights would come on. When you walk out, the lights go off, and those provide a substantial savings in terms of electricity. We're always on the lookout, and this is in fact one of the key functions of our purchasing department for finding ways where we can create operational efficiencies. Given our provincial funding and the property values, you went a little too fast there, Kathy, just the bottom piece. Again, the mill rate we're looking at is a reduction from 13.844 to 13.725. To revisit our enrollment, the last 2 years, our enrollment has gone up about 1.7%. Our expenditures have outpaced that a little bit, but we have to keep in mind that there is inflation and cost of living increases as well. Our proposed increase in budget, out of the $1.53 million proposed increases in our budget, a substantial piece of that are salaries and subject to board discretion, but less so maybe than some other expenditures. As our enrollment increases, I think it's natural that we need more teachers, and our salaries are contractual in nature, and we don't really have a whole lot of control over that. We do have agreements with all of our unions, particularly teachers, which make up the bulk of our staff, and we have to pay them what we've agreed to in our bargaining agreement that's contractual. We're also looking at about another $600,000 as well in investments in maintenance and technology equipment, and again, redirecting our resources as much as possible to the front line of the schools. That's it. I'm happy to take any questions for clarity, or the board's happy to take questions as well.
Thanks, Scott. So certainly the floor is open to you. There's a microphone up here. millions of people that are watching us online as this is being streamed. So 3 million. Anyways, if you have a question, we would like you to come on up. We have said that we would try to use our microphones at all times so that people can go ahead and hear. So if anybody has a question, certainly come grab the microphone up at the front and ask away. Introduce yourself and ask away. Ted, I know you're dying to go on up there. Grab the microphone and come ask a question if you like. Yes, please.
I was listening and also reading at the same time, and you mentioned something about a deficit. There was
In our most recently completed fiscal year, which would have been 2018-19, we did operate in a deficit position, yes.
for the whole year in a way.
At the end of the year on our audit, yeah. Yeah, we did present audited financial statements. Susan, do you remember what the number was? Roughly 400,000? Little more than 400,000, I believe.
And we're looking at a operating surplus last year and this coming year of 1.925 million.
To be clear, that doesn't represent an operating surplus. That's an accumulated surplus, which represents any surpluses we've had since the inception of Sunrise School Division. So almost picture like a bank account. If we run a surplus for a year, that stays in the bank account, and then if we run another surplus, it keeps adding up. Last year, before the start of the year, our accumulated surplus was 2.4 million, so our deficit would have caused that to come down to the 1.9 you see now.
How far are we going to keep the surpluses climbing?
It's definitely not our goal on an annual basis to have them increase. You know, the province mandates that we're not to have an accumulated surplus of any greater than 4% of our annual budget. So we stay within those parameters.
Why I say that, we've got an increase in assessment of our properties. Same people are living in the house, and lots of them don't get increases in pay yet. Municipal taxes and school taxes do go up because we get enticed by the province to do a little bit more, and they'll give us a little bit more. But it's the same people paying the taxes, so I think we're going to have to look at that coming to the future, because we aren't growing in this area. We may have an increase in teachers and a few new homes in the area, but other than that, the north part of the division isn't growing at all, from what I've seen. So those are just some of the questions. Maybe somebody else will trigger some more.
Thanks, Ted. Get you to speak into the microphone because those million people aren't hearing you.
Yeah, well, okay. Many years I've been coming to these meetings, and it's only recently that we've been singing "O Canada." But I don't see a flag.
You know what, Ted, there's a flag in here every board meeting except today. Because Art just said to me, "Where's our flag?" So Kathy just must have borrowed it somewhere. Anyway, so we have a flag in here. If you go online and check the millions of meetings that we have, it's a really good point, Ted. But we do have a flag, and as we stood up to sing "O Canada," everybody started looking for the flag, and Art said, "There's no flag." So it's a good point. We should have the flag here. Thanks, Ted, for bringing that out. But we do normally have one here. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions?
Carolyn Giles. My questions are related to the number of students versus the number of staff, et cetera. I guess I start off, my understanding of Sunrise, we have only approximately 4,500 students, or exactly how many students do we have?
I believe the number as of September 30th this year that we count September 30th every year
Okay.
that goes in, it's a big part of our funding, was 4,692 students.
I guess for that number of students, when I'm looking around, and maybe my comparisons are more with Ontario than in Manitoba. But I see, for example, in this board, I see 2 superintendents, yourself and Kathy. I see 2 assistant superintendents. Do we need that much for that number of students? I guess when I'm looking at budgets, I'm also looking at budgets. Are we adjusting our budgets for the reality we live in? For example, the reality that many of our parents are living in, and the cost of food, the cost of rent, the cost of taxes. Our properties, yes, are going up, but so are our taxes, depending on where we're living. So is this budget really a budget for the reality we find ourselves in? That's what I'm asking. And if we take a look at, for example, the cost of our consultants and the advice that they give, is that difficult to track? I would dare say it might be. And is there value, therefore, for the money that we are paying that many consultants? And finally, what I would ask all of you is, what improvements and efficiencies have been implemented in this past year? Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Paul Seraphin, Lactabunny, Sunrise Teachers Association. Lactabunny in my brain. All I can say is thank goodness for assessments. The number of teachers, Scott, that you referenced, 3 for an increase of 140 students. Can you just explain how you arrived at 3? And I have a follow-up question.
I would probably defer to Kathy on this.
Lots of times it depends on where the population falls and what that does to class sizes. So student in grade 1 here or 2 in grade 4 there, depends on where they're dispersed, and that's where it depends where they're dispersed. There's a reason I'm not talking tonight. So we might have 1 student in grade 1 at a particular school, and we might have 2 in grade 5 at a different school, and it doesn't warrant a class increase. It might be a smaller class. So we do class configurations and where are those students landing, and that's what decides what the teacher increase needs to be.
And Cole, I'm going to, I'll come back to you and say, 3 are proposed. It's not necessarily that it is going to go ahead and happen, but 3 are being proposed.
All right. With respect to then the 3 that are proposed, are those 3 teachers meant to, will they reside in a classroom, or will they be part of, and I just loosely term it, student services / resource? Do you know?
I'll answer that. We're not proposing any, as of right now, we're not proposing any changes in student services with regard to personnel, increased numbers, plus or minus. These are 3 classroom teachers Kathy and her staff are looking at. And for us then trying to keep, student-to-teacher ratio harmonious with what we're doing across the division. These are classroom teachers that are being.
All right. I don't mean to blindside anybody with this question, but with respect to the K to 3, obviously the association's been advocating for a decrease in the K to 3 numbers. That is pre-2018, 16 K to 3 class caps of 20. Has there been any consideration to move back to those numbers?
As of right now, we're not heading in that direction. Again, this is all proposed, Cole. We did take a look at what our numbers were with regard to class sizes with K to 3, and as of right now, we're not heading in that direction.
Okay. On to the next question. I believe that there was a proposed science lab refurb planned or slated for Lac Du Bonnet, and just wondering what the status of that project currently, where that project currently sits.
Certainly something that has been on the radar for our maintenance department. It is costly. Budget's always tough. I mentioned, I was sitting with the maintenance manager, and he had $1 million for the priorities and $400,000 in the budget. So, it's one of those things where we need to get together as a board, review all of the things across the division that are priorities for our facilities, and make those decisions at the board level.
Would that have formerly been eligible for public schools finance funding?
Potentially. I mean, we did do one in Lac Du Bonnet, and we looked at getting funding for that. That was not last year, but the year before. As of right now, PSFP's kind of locked the door and said we're not doing anything at this moment. So where that shakes out over the next 6 months or a year, we'll be very interested to see.
The other thing I can add to you, Cole, is there's been direction to school boards, and anybody correct me if I'm wrong with this. There's been directions from school boards that we cannot to take our accumulated surpluses and do any kind of capital D projects. Is that fair? The board, that's our understanding. Any new builds or renovations?
I think capital projects are lumped into that. So yes. Right. Speaking of capital, kind of interested in I guess now or soon to close Green Church belongs to the division. I'm just wondering if you could, anybody could tell me where the proceeds from, I guess, an impending eventual sale are going to end up.
If you want to buy it, we can talk as to where we go.
Good investment.
Yeah. So the board, we've asked our superintendent for a plan about moving our clinicians into schools and not using the Green Church. She's been reporting to us on a regular basis, certainly about that with that plan, and the board has yet to decide what we're doing with the Green Church. And yeah, if we can make millions of dollars from the Green Church, we'd be pretty happy. Probably not so sure that we're going to be making millions of dollars.
Okay, that wasn't the answer that I was expecting. I thought that those monies had to be, the proceeds of sale of capital items had to be returned to the province. Do we know anything about that?
I believe that may be the case in projects that they funded, i.e. school builds. In fact, we do need PSFP approval as well to dispose of those types of facilities. In fact, we'll probably need PSFP approval to sell the Green Church. But I don't believe that money needs to go back in provincial coffers. I believe that would be discretionary for the board.
All right. Thank you.
We're live. I would like to hear an answer to a question that was posed previously about where have you gained efficiencies in your budget?
We're constantly looking for efficiencies. Sometimes they don't manifest itself. We've recently lost a finance person that we're not replacing. We're sort of reallocating responsibilities internally. One of only about, we have 2, 4, about 8 in finance, so that's a significant portion of the work that we do. It's tough to answer that, Peter. I mean, I'm very proud of the fact that we're holding the line in our operational costs. When inflation dictates that costs are increasing, we can't control the cost of utilities, the cost of fuel. Many things are outside of our control. I'll give you an example. The pump price of fuel has increased dramatically over the last 10 years, and our fuel prices haven't gone up that much. We invested in a piece of software. I'm going to botch the name. Our transportation director could tell you more about it, but we actually watch idle time on our buses and reprimand drivers if they're idling too much. We have strict parameters around how long those buses are allowed to idle, and we've worked hard to reduce our fuel consumption by quite a bit. I'm fairly new here, so I can't speak to what's happened, more distant than a year and a half ago, but we're really starting to look at things like LED lighting in schools. We're starting to look at things like taking advantage of buying groups who were at the municipal forum the other day where the Association of Manitoba Municipalities presented, and we're definitely looking at taking advantage of some of the preferential pricing there. We do RFPs for a lot of the goods and services that we purchase. Software that we've implemented should manifest itself in efficiencies and savings at certain points. So, it's tough to present a budget where we haven't cut in this type of environment, but the fact that we can sort of hold the line on overhead costs in the face of inflation and increasing costs to me is I'm proud of that.
Another piece of software that we use has to do with staffing, and we're able to track attendance. And that lets us look at the number of staff who are away from the building and what are we doing. We're more accurate with that, and we can gain efficiencies because that is now like an online feature that we can actually look at, and we're able to dig into that. We've also been doing projections for the 5-year projections. We look at our staffing and our class sizes and our compositions, and we're doing that on a 5-year basis and running what does that look like from where we projected to where we actually landed. And I'm pretty pleased to say over the last 3 years, we've either been right close to our projections or under. So one of the biggest efficiencies when we talk about a budget of 80% and we have staffing, for us to be looking really closely at those wages and how many we're staffing for on projections, we don't take that lightly. We actually do a whole host of analysis on how many we have, making sure that we're close with what we need to do the work that we're doing in buildings. The other piece that maybe not as visible, we do performance evaluations and assessments for all of our staff. So we're able to then have those conversations about how are people performing. And that's not something that we can talk about in a public budget either. I'm fairly certain Scott doesn't want his evaluation up on the screen, but we do those kinds of things as well, which helps us look at where are we gaining those efficiencies with people.
Not that my evaluation is bad, by the way.
It isn't. It's a very good evaluation.
I don't want to go too far off what you just mentioned, but staff evaluations, is that a 360-degree type of process where people working under you are part of the evaluation process?
You can go online certainly for it. I don't think that's a budget conversation to go ahead and have. I think that if you ever wanted to go in and sit down and have a conversation with Kathy, certainly about our staff evaluations, the only thing that we can do is that we do evaluate our staff, but we really don't talk publicly about our process.
Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. And one thing that was left out, and I just wanted to point out, it is a small thing, but I think it stands true to represent the way this board feels about increasing expenditures and that sort of thing is I'm not sure if you're familiar. I believe you would be. But there was a long-standing federal tax exemption for elected municipal officers and school trustees that had expired January 1st of 2019. And a lot of other boards and municipal governments went ahead and raised their indemnities or their salaries to offset that. And this board stood strong and said we weren't going to do that.
You're not pointing any fingers at any municipality, are you?
I might be, yeah. So that's just one way that we felt as a board that we would stand true to that, and we didn't go ahead and do that because, again, I think that was just more of a, it would be a small amount, but yeah, that was something we went ahead and did.
I think Don wants to try something.
You asked about one of the efficiencies that about 2 years ago we went from diesel buses to gasoline buses. We got a preliminary report sometime last year, and it says that we saved some money. I don't know the exact amount, but it was worthwhile for us to change from diesel to gasoline. Not only the fuel that we saved, but also the repair on it. We're getting another report. I think it's supposed to be in March. Is that right? Okay, May. We're going to get one in May, and that will. Because we're keeping a very close on. We picked 10 diesel buses, we picked 10 gasoline buses, and we tracked them very closely. And we believe that that will be efficient, and we'll be saving money.
I think you may have answered in many of your responses my question about what seems to be confusing about the transportation budget, where you have a moderate increase in the budget, but a significant decrease in the cost per pupil. And I'm wondering if that relates to, besides the efficiencies you're talking about, to the number of students that are being bused. Or the change in the number of students that are being bused.
I think it's probably both of those things. It's a question of efficiency, but then also the more students we have to put on the buses, that number per kid's going to go down. So we're keeping that efficiency. And I think that if you look at all of those slides where you have the left side and then the right side of our per student is going down on a pretty regular basis. We're gaining those efficiencies, having more students in there, but not increasing by the amount that you probably should with that increase of students going in there.
Has there been any change in the government support for busing students?
No.
No, our provincial funding did increase this year, largely because of our base support around enrollment, because of our increases in enrollment. And the province also gives us some funding they call equalization, which is designed to level the playing field between more and less affluent divisions across the province. I haven't taken a deep dive on that yet, but for some reason ours increased dramatically this year. Those were the two pieces of funding that did increase this year.
Were you addressing the particular funding on the transportable students when I asked that question?
Yes, yes. So short answer, no. The transportation funding did not increase.
Okay, thank you. What is the deadline that the province has imposed on your 50% management costs?
So we have to have a decision by September. So we have to have it implemented in a decision. So it's not going to be a decision on September the 3rd because we're going to have to go ahead and make the decision April through to June, July to have it implemented for September 2020. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, hearing none, thank you for coming. Certainly, we appreciate your feedback. Our responsibility now is by March the 3rd to pass a budget. We know that we're going to do some deliberating, a fair bit over the next little while. So thanks very much for coming. Can the board stay for a minute or two before we all head out? But thanks for the general public for coming. Appreciate it. We need to call our meeting. We have to adjourn our meeting. So I need a motion to adjourn. Motion by Art. I guess we're adjourned.
Thank you. Hmm?